He stood alone in court, no lawyer, no suit, just a worn military jacket and quiet eyes. The judge smirked. The prosecutor scoffed. The courtroom laughed. Until he spoke. Until he questioned. Until the truth began to turn. What no one knew was that this single dad wasn't just defending himself. He was about to reveal a past so brilliant, so buried, that it would silence the entire room and change one woman's heart forever. The courtroom was packed. Wooden pews creaked under the weight of anticipation, and every cough, shuffle, and breath echoed off the marble floors of courtroom 7B. A small-town courthouse built in the 1960s, still clinging to its once proud architectural dignity. Now fluorescent lights buzzed faintly overhead, and the scent of aged paper floor wax and tension hung thick in the air. Logan Carter stood alone at the defendant's table. His posture was calm, but steady, like a man used to standing under fire. He wore a faded green military jacket, the collar slightly frayed over a plain button-down shirt. His longish hair swept back loosely touched with gray. No lawyer stood beside him, no family, no allies, only him. Across from him, the prosecutor, Assistant District Attorney Mark Keegan, was surrounded by his team 3 deep. Young, well-groomed, sharp suit, cocky smile. He scanned Logan like a predator would a wounded animal. Confident. Too confident. And presiding over them all, Judge Isabella Reeves, 35. Strikingly beautiful. Hair tied back in a no-nonsense twist. Her robe crisp, her posture like steel. Her heels clicked sharply as she entered, and the moment she took her seat, the murmurs died. She adjusted her glasses, then glanced at the file marked, State of California vs. Logan Carter. She blinked once then again. "Mr. Carter," she said, eyes gliding down the page. "You've chosen to waive your right to counsel and represent yourself." Logan nodded slowly. "Yes, Your Honor." She closed the file with a soft thud and looked up at him for the first time properly looked. Her eyes narrowed. A hint of curiosity followed immediately by condescension. She leaned back in her chair, lifted her chin, and offered a half-smile that didn't reach her eyes. "You do understand this is a courtroom, not a battlefield, Mr. Carter. No medals for bravery here." A few scattered chuckles rippled through the crowd behind the bar. The prosecutor smirked. Logan didn't blink. His voice was low quiet, but it carried like a slow-moving tide. "I'm not here to fight, Your Honor. I'm here to tell the truth." That silenced the smirks briefly. Judge Reeves tapped her pen against the bench, considering him again. "Very well. The court recognizes Mr. Logan Carter as pro se defendant. But I caution you, this court does not tolerate theatrics. I have none to offer," Logan said. "Just facts." Ada Keegan stood. "Then let's begin, Your Honor." He strolled before the jury box like a man conducting an orchestra. His voice was polished, his tone authoritative. "Ladies and gentlemen, what we have here is a case as clear as day. The defendant, Mr. Carter, was caught fleeing the scene of a stolen vehicle, a 2015 black Chevy Silverado belonging to Mrs. Margaret Thompson. The dashboard was torn open, the ignition wiring exposed, witnessed by a responding officer, captured on security footage. And when stopped, Mr. Carter resisted arrest. This isn't a misunderstanding. This is a man caught red-handed. He turned to the jury, hands spread wide. We are a nation of laws, not emotions, not war stories. And no one, not even a decorated veteran, is above the law." A few jurors glanced toward Logan, some with sympathy, others with suspicion. Judge Reeves nodded. "You may call your first witness." Keegan straightened. "The state calls Officer Ryan Daniels." A tall, broad-shouldered officer in full uniform approached the stand. His jaw was clenched, posture stiff. Logan didn't even look at him as he was sworn in. Officer Daniels Keegan began. "Can you tell the court what you saw on the evening of March 3rd? "Yes, sir," the officer replied. "I was patrolling near the Edgewater apartments when I observed a man. That man he pointed at Logan bent over near the driver's side of a black pickup truck. It was dark, but he had a flashlight in his hand. When I approached, he saw me and bolted. I pursued and tackled him 2 blocks down. He struggled, refused to answer any questions." Keegan paced slowly. "Were you able to see what he was doing specifically?" "Looked like he was under the dashboard, messing with wires. Classic hot wiring posture." "And how far were you when you saw this?" "About 20 feet away." "In the dark, yes. But he had a flashlight." Keegan turned to the judge. No further questions. Judge Reeves turned to Logan. "Mr. Carter, your witness." Logan finally looked at Officer Daniels. His expression was unreadable. Not angry, not nervous, just still. He walked slowly toward the stand. "Officer Daniels," he said calmly, "you mentioned seeing me messing with wires under the dashboard from 20 feet away." "Yes, from outside the vehicle." "Yes. Was the vehicle locked? I believe so." "Then how did I open the door? I assumed you broke in. Did you find any sign of forced entry?" "Number of fingerprints?" "No, it had rained earlier." "So just to be clear," Logan said, turning slightly to the jury, "you saw through a closed window at night into a dark truck and clearly identified a man crouching and tampering with wires without opening the door or any clear line of sight." The officer shifted uncomfortably. He had a flashlight. Logan stepped closer. "So did you, officer. And yet you couldn't describe the color of my jacket when you tackled me, could you?" A pause. "No." Logan nodded. No further questions. Judge Reeves sat straighter. Her eyes flicked to Keegan, then back to Logan. The smirk was gone now, replaced with something sharper, something curious. She reached for her pen and scribbled a note. "Very well," she said. "We'll proceed." Logan returned to his seat. He didn't look at the crowd or the judge. He simply rested his hands calmly on the table. But something had shifted in the room. The laughter was gone. Even the smirks were quieter now. And for the first time, someone in the jury box leaned forward not to scoff, but to listen. The tension inside the courtroom had shifted. Gone was the condescending amusement. In its place was a quiet uncertainty, like the stillness before a thunderstorm. Even Judge Isabella Reeves, who moments ago wore a smirk of judicial superiority, now leaned slightly forward. Her eyes tracked Logan Carter with more scrutiny. The robe she wore no longer felt like armor, it felt like responsibility. But ADA Mark Keegan wasn't rattled. He stepped forward again, brushing off his lapels like he had just stumbled slightly, but regained full control. He flashed the jury his charming grin, one that had won dozens of convictions in this very room. "Your Honor," he began with permission, "I'd like to formally submit the state's list of charges for the record." Judge Reeves nodded without lifting her gaze from Logan. "Proceed." Keegan lifted a single sheet and handed it to the clerk. Then, with deliberate precision, he turned to the jury. "Mr. Carter stands accused of the following." He paced slowly, milking every word. "Count 1. Unlawful entry and theft of a motor vehicle." He stopped. "Count 2. Obstruction of justice and resisting arrest." Another pause. He scanned the jury for a reaction. "Count 3. Intent to tamper with evidence, specifically alleged efforts to disable or obscure the vehicle's dashboard camera during the incident." A quiet gasp rippled from the back row. An older man in a veteran's cap shook his head, slowly, disappointment clouding his face. Logan didn't flinch. Keegan gestured toward the evidence table where a sealed evidence bag sat. Inside was a small, cracked dash cam. Its lens was shattered, the wires frayed. This device, pulled from the vehicle, was discovered, smashed, its internal memory wiped. The state intends to show that this destruction occurred at the same time as the alleged theft attempt. The motive, to erase any trace of Mr. Carter's presence. He turned to Judge Reeves. And we have a surveillance video, grainy, yes, but enough to place him at the scene. Logan folded his hands. He did not interrupt. He did not look flustered. Judge Reeves scribbled more notes on her yellow pad. Then she addressed him. Mr. Carter, do you have a response at this point to the list of charges? Logan's voice remained steady. Only that a list of charges doesn't make them true. Keegan chuckled under his breath. Typical. Logan turned to the jury, meeting them with calm, unblinking eyes. You'll hear a lot of things in this room. Words strung together to sound like truth. But watch closely. Most of them fall apart under weight. Judge Reeves looked up again, eyes sharp. Mr. Carter, remember you are not here to give opening statements. Stay within procedure. He nodded slightly. Understood. But in the gallery, someone murmured. He talks like a lawyer. Keegan called his second witness, Detective Lisa Monroe, a tech specialist with the LAPD. Short, sharp-voiced, with a gaze that suggested she suffered no fools, Monroe stepped to the stand and was sworn in. Detective Monroe, Keegan began, please describe what you found when analyzing the dashcam from Mrs. Thompson's vehicle. We recovered the device from the glove compartment. It was physically damaged, shattered lens, corrupted data chip. The damage was not consistent with a manufacturer defect or accident. What does that suggest to you? Intentional tampering. Was it repairable partially? We retrieved fragments of time-stamped footage, but key segments were overwritten. Keegan turned to Logan. And would you say that kind of erasure requires technical knowledge? Yes, Monroe said. You'd need to know how to disable a data chip and physically interrupt power flow, like someone with military training. Possibly, she said, or just someone who's read a few tech manuals. The insinuation hung in the air like smoke. Logan rose from his seat. Detective Monroe. He began, gently. Have you examined dozens of dashcams? Hundreds. And are you aware that the model in question has a common overheating flaw that causes spontaneous shutdowns and data corruption? She frowned. I've heard of the issue, but not in this context. Logan handed her a paper. This is a recall notice from the manufacturer issued 5 months ago. Over 20,000 units affected, including this model. Monroe studied the document. I wasn't aware of this recall. But I'd need to verify. Of course, Logan said calmly. But I'd caution against drawing conclusions from partial evidence. He turned to Keegan. Isn't that what we're here to avoid? Judge Reeves's brow lifted. She tapped her pen once, then again. The jury shifted in their seats, murmuring among themselves. Something was happening. The so-called open and shut case was leaking. Keegan's face darkened. As the clerk called a brief recess for the court to reset the AV equipment, Logan stood alone by the window. Outside, sunlight filtered through cracked blinds. Dust danced in its glow. Judge Reeves descended from the bench and walked past the tables toward her chambers. She paused for the briefest moment beside Logan. Her voice was low, just above a whisper. You've studied legal procedure? Logan didn't look at her. A little. You're not just bluffing up there. That's real cross-examination. He turned, met her eyes. They were sharper than before, but not unkind. I've been in a few courtrooms, he said simply. Reeves studied him for one more second, then turned without another word. But her next note in the margin of her legal pad read, dig deeper. Who is he? When court resumed after the brief recess, the jury filed back in with murmured conversations. Some looked pensive, others skeptical. The recall document Logan had introduced lingered in the minds of everyone like a single pebble, cracking the foundation of a solid case. Ada Keegan wasn't about to let that small victory fester. He rose smoother this time, like a man recovering from a stumble and ready to reassert dominance. "Your Honor," he said, his voice calm but deliberate. "The state now calls Officer Bradley Daniels to the stand, a veteran of the LAPD, 14 years on the force." A ripple of curiosity ran through the gallery. Logan looked up from his notes. His face didn't change, but his right hand curled slightly into a fist, not from fear, but preparation. The courtroom doors opened, and in walked Officer Daniels, tall, broad-chested, and with the kind of facial rigidity that made him look like he'd been chiseled out of stone. The room seemed to straighten around him, like even the furniture respected his authority. He took the stand, was sworn in, and nodded once toward Judge Reeves. Officer Daniels Keegan began. "Please tell the court what you observed on the night of March 3rd. Daniels leaned into the microphone. "I was patrolling Sector 9 near the Edgewater apartments when I noticed movement near a parked black truck. It was late, close to midnight, and visibility was low. I saw the defendant, Mr. Logan Carter, crouched near the driver's side, appearing to manipulate something inside the car. How far were you?" "Roughly 20 feet, across the lot. Could you clearly identify what he was doing?" "He had a flashlight. I saw his hands move in a way consistent with tampering. I believed he was attempting to hotwire the vehicle. And when you approached, Daniels's jaw tightened. He saw me, took off running. I pursued, caught him about 2 blocks away. He resisted. Hard. Were you in uniform?" "Yes." "Did you identify yourself?" "Loud and clear." Keegan nodded toward the jury. "And what state was the vehicle in after the incident?" "The glove box was open, dashboard panel loose, and a dash cam visibly cracked." Keegan let those words sink in. Then, with a tone of triumph, "Is there any doubt in your mind, Officer Daniels, that Mr. Carter was attempting to steal that vehicle?" Daniels turned his head slowly toward Logan. "None." Judge Reeves shifted slightly in her seat. Her gaze moved from Daniels to Logan and back again. This officer was credible, composed, respected. His words carried weight. She tapped her pen once on the pad. "Mr. Carter," she said without emotion. "Your witness?" Logan stood slowly. He didn't walk with bravado, but with focus, the way a surgeon approaches an incision. "Officer Daniels," he began, voice steady. "Thank you for your service." Daniels nodded once. "You said you were about 20 feet away in a dark parking lot." "Correct." "And you saw me? How, through the window?" "Yes." "From across the lot with my flashlight." Logan nodded. He stepped closer, holding up a printed photo, a blown-up still frame of the Chevy Silverado's interior. "This is the view from outside the driver's window, officer. That's double-paned glass. And tinted correct." Daniels glanced at the image. "Yes, but... And you claim to have seen me manipulating wires?" "Through a tinted window. In darkness. From 20 feet away, I saw movement. I've been trained to recognize criminal intent." "Criminal intent," Logan repeated softly. "From a crouched figure in a jacket." Daniels's face stiffened. Logan turned slightly toward the jury, then back. "What color was my jacket?" Officer Daniels hesitated. "Green." Logan raised an eyebrow. "Are you sure military green?" "Standard?" Logan glanced at Judge Reeves. "Your Honor, may I admit Exhibit C into evidence?" She nodded. He walked to the table and held up the actual jacket he'd worn that night, sealed in a clear plastic bag tagged by police. It was dark, navy blue. The courtroom stilled. Logan turned back to Daniels. "You say I was in military green. But here's the jacket. Navy. Not faded. Not even close." Daniels opened his mouth, but no words came out. "You also said the dash cam was visibly cracked. But according to chain of custody reports, that vehicle wasn't examined until 12 hours after I was detained. You never saw the dash cam. Isn't that right?" Daniels didn't respond. Officer Daniels Logan pressed. "Isn't it true That when you pursued me, you never identified yourself by name, department, or badge number, and that you tackled me from behind, in plain clothes, without any verbal command? Judge Reeves sat up straighter. Plain clothes, Daniels finally spoke. Voice tight. I was in patrol gear, but I had removed my outer vest due to heat. My badge was clipped on my belt. So to a man being approached in the dark, Logan said softly, "You could have looked like anyone." A long silence. The jury was leaning in now. Logan let the moment breathe. Then he stepped back. No further questions. Keegan leapt up. "Redirect, Your Honor." Judge. Reeves nodded. "Officer Daniels, did the defendant resist when you tried to detain him?" Daniels, grateful for a lifeline, nodded sharply. He struggled. "Threw me off twice." "And isn't it true you announced yourself as law enforcement when pursuing him?" "I did." Keegan turned to the jury. Regardless of what color jacket he wore or how clear the window was, this officer witnessed a man flee the scene of a suspicious situation and resist arrest. Let's not lose the forest for the trees. But Judge Reeves wasn't looking at Keegan anymore. She was looking at Logan. She couldn't explain it, not yet, but something about his precision, the clarity of his questions, the strategic silence. It reminded her of someone. No, not someone. Something. She scribbled another note in the margin. Not just a vet. This man knows the law. The gallery was still buzzing from the last exchange. Though no one said it out loud, the question was on everyone's mind. Who exactly is this man defending himself like a seasoned trial attorney? But Logan Carter didn't care about impressions. He cared about precision. He quietly returned to the defendant's table as Ada Keegan rifled through his papers, increasingly animated, tapping his pen against the edge of his yellow legal pad with growing impatience. The confident rhythm that once marked his every move had been replaced by staccato frustration. Judge Reeves took a sip from her glass, then leaned forward. "Mr. Carter, you may call your next witness if you intend to call one." "I do, Your Honor," Logan said calmly. "I'd like to call Margaret Thompson to the stand." Keegan raised an eyebrow. The registered owner of the vehicle, Judge Reeves, nodded. "Call her." The bailiff opened the side door, and in stepped Mrs. Margaret Thompson, a petite woman in her mid-60s, wearing a neat cardigan and a pearl necklace. Her expression was polite, but confused, her eyes darting between Logan and Keegan. She took the stand and was sworn in. Logan approached slowly, gently, like a man who had no interest in intimidation, only truth. "Mrs. Thompson, thank you for being here. I'll keep this brief. On the night of March 3rd, did you report your vehicle stolen?" "Yes," she replied. "The police called and said someone had been caught near it. They asked if I had loaned it out, and I said no." "You didn't know anyone else might have had access?" She hesitated. "Well, no. Not that I remembered at the time." "Do you live alone?" "I do now. My husband is in assisted living, early-stage Parkinson's." Logan nodded sympathetically. "Understood. And your husband, Mr. Donald Thompson, did he ever drive that vehicle?" "Of course. It used to be his truck before he gave it to me." "And would he have had access to the keys?" She blinked. "Yes, I suppose he would." Logan turned to the judge. "Your Honor, I request permission to call Mr. Donald Thompson as a surprise witness." Keegan immediately objected. "Your Honor, we were not notified of any such witness. This is irregular." "He's in the gallery," Logan said, turning slightly. "I made no arrangements. He came of his own accord when he learned what this trial was about." Heads turned. In the second row, an elderly man in a worn brown jacket slowly stood. His hands trembled slightly on his cane, but his eyes were clear. Judge Reeves studied him. Then she looked at Keegan. "Counselor, you yourself emphasized the importance of full truth. Let's hear what he has to say." Keegan muttered under his breath. but didn't protest further. The bailiff assisted Mr. Thompson to the stand. His posture was frail, but his voice carried a surprising clarity as he was sworn in. Logan stepped forward. "Mr. Thompson, do you recognize me?" Donald leaned forward, squinting, then nodded. "Yes, I do. Can you tell the court how you know me?" "You're Logan Carter. You're friends with my grandson, Alex. And what is Alex's relationship to the vehicle in question?" Donald coughed slightly. I gave him the truck that week. Told him he could use it for a few days. He was helping me move some boxes from the storage unit. I didn't think Margaret would mind." The room froze. Margaret gasped quietly. "Don, you never told me that." "I forgot," he said, gently looking at her. "You know how I get. I meant to tell you that night, but my mind slips." Logan let the silence breathe. "Then, so, to confirm on the night in question, you had given permission for Alex to use the truck?" "Yes, which means it was not stolen." "Correct." Judge Reeves sat forward, hands folded. Keegan looked like a man trying not to choke on his own tongue. "Your Honor," Logan said evenly, "I ask the court to strike count 1, unlawful entry, and vehicle theft from the charges." The owner's family member gave permission. Keegan shot up. "Objection. That's not the legal owner, but the legal owner herself just admitted she wasn't aware Logan countered, and now admits her husband did have access to the vehicle and did give permission. This isn't just about registration, it's about consent." Judge Reeves stared at Logan for a long beat, then slowly turned to Keegan. "The defense is correct. Consent given by a co-owner or prior primary user with access to the keys creates reasonable doubt. Motion to strike count 1 is granted." Gasps filled the room. Keegan dropped into his chair, stunned. Judge Reeves turned back to Logan, her voice low but firm. "Mr. Carter, you're navigating the burden of proof like someone who's done this before." Logan gave a slight bow of his head. "I've had to defend things more important than myself." Her gaze lingered on him longer than necessary. Then she looked away. "Proceed." The tide had turned. It was subtle, like a ripple cutting across still water. But it was there, in the jury's posture, in the shifting eyes of the gallery, even in the way Judge Reeves tapped her pen, slower, now more thoughtful. Logan Carter had just won his first reversal, and somewhere deep behind that judge's steely composure, admiration had begun to bloom, quietly, dangerously, for a moment after Judge Reeves struck count 1. Silence filled the courtroom like fog. The impact was undeniable, not just procedural, but symbolic. The slam-dunk case had its first crack, and it was spreading. Keegan sat stiffly scribbling on his legal pad with tight, angry motions. His earlier confidence had been replaced by calculation. He would recover, but now he was chasing the case, not leading it. Logan Carter, meanwhile, stood composed. He wasn't smiling. There was no triumph in his expression, just clarity. Focus. Like a man who'd seen too many battles to celebrate early victories. "Your Honor," he said, voice steady at this time, "I'd like to recall Mrs. Margaret Thompson to the stand." Keegan's head snapped up. "Objection. She's already testified." "But not under examination about her recollection and chain of ownership," Logan interjected. "Given the court's ruling, it's essential." Judge Reeves nodded, intrigued. "Objection overruled. Proceed." Mrs. Thompson returned to the stand, visibly rattled from the previous revelation. Logan approached gently. "Mrs. Thompson, I understand this has been upsetting. I'll tread carefully. May I ask, how long has your husband's memory been inconsistent?" She clasped her hands tightly. "A little over a year now. Some days are better than others. And during that time, would you say your household routines, access to belongings, and communication have sometimes overlapped?" She hesitated, then nodded. Yes. There have been times I thought something was missing, but it was just Dawn moving it. Do you remember the last time you personally drove the truck in question? Her brow furrowed. No. I think it was a few weeks before the incident. Logan nodded. So it's possible the truck was moved without your knowledge in that window? Yes. Did you ever file a police report saying the vehicle was missing before you were contacted? No. I only reported it after the officer called and asked. Logan turned to the jury. In other words, the assumption of theft began after the arrest, not before. Keegan stood abruptly. Your Honor, may I approach? Reeves motioned him forward. They met in a whispered sidebar, her expression unreadable. After a moment, she gave a single nod. Keegan stepped back, but his shoulders were tighter than before. Logan continued, his voice softening. Mrs. Thompson, do you recall ever meeting me prior to this event? She blinked. No. Should I have? Not necessarily, Logan said kindly. But do you recognize this photo? He held up a snapshot, a simple candid. It showed Logan beside a younger man laughing, holding a box of tools, standing near the same Silverado. Date stamped, 2 weeks before the incident. That's Alex, she murmured. Yes, your grandson. And this, he pointed to a sliver in the photo barely visible. My husband, in the background, she whispered. Logan lowered the photo. I was helping Alex install a new tow hitch. Your husband offered me coffee. We shook hands. The gallery stirred again. Even Judge Reeves leaned forward. Logan let the silence breathe, then turned back to Mrs. Thompson. So if Alex gave me the keys and your husband saw me with the vehicle, would you say it was reasonable for me to believe I had legitimate access? She closed her eyes briefly. When she opened them again, there was no malice, no suspicion, only apology. Yes, I suppose it would be. No further questions. Keegan rose slowly. Mrs. Thompson, he began, trying to recover his rhythm. Would you agree that memory lapses are unreliable? Of course. And that your husband, while kind-hearted, is not always consistent in what he recalls. She shifted uncomfortably. He has his moments, but when he's clear, he's clear. Keegan forced a smile. But that's subjective, isn't it? Isn't everything in court? She replied, surprising everyone, especially herself. The courtroom chuckled quietly. Judge Reeves hid a half smile behind her fingers. Keegan clenched his jaw. No further questions. As Mrs. Thompson stepped down, Logan returned to his seat. He didn't glance at the jury, he didn't need to. Their body language said it all. Leaning forward, alert, engaged. And Judge Reeves, her pen was still. She watched Logan with an expression no longer laced with judgment, but with careful attention. She had seen lawyers crumble under pressure, lash out when a case turned. But this man, he dissected testimony with scalpel precision and never once lost his composure. He was more than well-spoken. He was trained. Just before the next break, Judge Reeves made an announcement. This court acknowledges the factual dispute surrounding the vehicle's possession. Count 1 has been stricken. Remaining charges are now the sole focus of the jury's deliberation. She glanced toward Logan deliberately. Mr. Carter, do you anticipate further witnesses? Logan nodded. Yes, Your Honor, but not today. Reeves paused. Understood. Court is adjourned until 9 a.m. tomorrow. The gavel fell. As people stood to leave, a quiet moment passed between Logan and Judge Reeves. Their eyes met. She didn't speak, but for the first time, her gaze didn't say, "You don't belong here." It said, "I underestimated you." Logan gave a respectful nod, then turned to gather his notes. As the courtroom emptied, whispers trailed behind him. He's no amateur. Did you see how calm he was? He made the prosecutor look like the rookie. And from the jury box, one older woman murmured, "He's not just fighting for himself. He's fighting for the truth." The next morning, the courtroom was even more crowded. Word had spread. Not about the prosecution, not about the supposed open and shut case, but about the defendant, a single dad, a veteran representing himself with uncanny poise and strategy. Court staff, off-duty attorneys, even a few local journalists had slipped in, curious to witness what some were calling the case that turned itself inside out. Logan Carter arrived early, wearing the same worn green jacket, the same calm expression. He carried no briefcase, no assistant, just a folder of carefully arranged notes and a presence that filled more space than his stature should have allowed. At exactly 9:00 a.m., Judge Isabella Reeves entered the chamber, black robe, flowing expression unreadable. "Court is now in session," she announced. "Mr. Keegan, you may proceed." The prosecutor stood, jaw set. "Thank you, Your Honor. At this time, the state would like to enter its most direct piece of evidence into the Record Exhibit G security camera footage, captured on the night of March 3rd, from a business adjacent to the Edgewater apartment complex." He nodded to a tech assistant near the AV station. The lights dimmed slightly as a flat-screen monitor flickered to life. The grainy footage began to roll. A timestamp in the corner, March 3rd, 11:48 p.m. A dimly lit parking lot appeared on screen. The resolution was poor. Shadows danced across the frame as wind moved branches. Then a figure entered from the left, hooded, lean. The person moved toward a black pickup, the Chevy Silverado in question. They crouched near the driver's side door, fiddled with something. Seconds passed. Then headlights flashed. The figure darted away. Choppy, pixelated, unclear, but suggestive. Keegan let the silence hang before turning to the jury. "Ladies and gentlemen, the defendant would have you believe he was innocently interacting with a borrowed vehicle. But this," he pointed to the screen, "is not innocence. This is concealment. This is flight. And though the resolution is low, the profile, the shape, the timing, all match." He turned to the judge. "We rest the visual evidence here." Logan stood without hesitation. Permission to approach the monitor. "Your Honor, Judge." Reeves glanced at Keegan, then nodded. "Granted." Logan walked to the front of the courtroom and turned to the jury. "Thank you. Let's break this down together." He raised a hand toward the screen and tapped the corner. "First note the timestamp. 11:48 p.m. Earlier testimony from Officer Daniels claimed the arrest occurred at 11:52. That gives us a 4-minute window from the moment this footage ends to when he claims to have chased and tackled me 2 blocks away." He looked back at the jury. "I don't know about you, but sprinting 2 blocks through back alleys, being tackled, and resisting arrest all in 4 minutes seems a bit tight, doesn't it?" A juror blinked. Another tilted their head thoughtfully. Second, Logan continued notice the figure's clothing. He held up a freeze frame of the video on a printed still. Baggy hoodie, dark jeans. And look here. He zoomed into the image. A pair of sneakers. High ankle, probably white-soled. Contrast that with what I wore during arrest boots. Military cut, no hoodie. He placed his own booking photo side by side with the image. Gasps fluttered across the gallery. Even Judge Reeves leaned forward slightly, eyes narrowing. Logan didn't stop. "Third," he said, voice calm but razor sharp. "The individual never opens the truck door. No visible sign of entry. Just crouching. For how long? 25 seconds. He looked directly at the jury now. Anyone who's ever tried to start a car without a key knows 25 seconds isn't long enough to hotwire anything, let alone a 2015 Chevy with a factory immobilizer." Keegan stood abruptly. "Objection." "He's not an automotive expert." Logan held up a printout. "Actually, Your Honor, this is an article from the manufacturer's official security bulletin. States clearly post-2013 models have anti-theft electronic immobilizers. Any attempt to hotwire would trigger lockdown and take at least 3 minutes to even access the wiring. Judge Reeves took the document from the bailiff, skimmed it, then looked at Keegan. Overruled. Logan returned to the center of the courtroom. One last thing he said, his voice dipping lower. The figure in the video moves with their left side dominant. Watch closely. He gestured for the tech assistant to replay the moment where the figure picks something up and adjusts a sleeve. Left hand. Every movement. He raised his own right hand. I'm right-handed. Documented in military records. Signed on every piece of paperwork in this courtroom. I even shook Officer Daniels's hand with it after being booked. Silence fell like snow. Judge Reeves stared at him. Her face betrayed nothing, except the faintest flicker of something new. Respect. Real professional, unmistakable respect. After a long pause, she looked down at her notes and spoke softly. Mr. Keegan, do you have any rebuttal? The prosecutor hesitated, flipping through his files. Only that interpretation of video footage is subjective. Logan cut in gently. Then perhaps it shouldn't be the cornerstone of your argument. A quiet ooh rolled through the gallery like a wave at a football game. Judge Reeves tapped her gavel lightly. Enough, she said, but her voice lacked sharpness. It was controlled, impressed even. She looked to Logan again. Mr. Carter, please submit all exhibits as part of the record. He nodded. Of course, Your Honor. As Logan returned to his seat, the jury watched him no longer as a man on trial, but as something more. And from the bench, Judge Reeves studied the worn green jacket draped over his chair. Who are you really? Her eyes seemed to ask. She wouldn't have to wait long to find out. It had come down to one charge. Count 2, resisting arrest. The theft had been dismantled, the video evidence neutralized, the witness testimony discredited or reshaped. Now all that remained was the final thread holding the case together, the act of running. To the prosecution, it was a confession in motion. To Logan Carter, it was something far more human. Judge Reeves adjusted her robe and scanned the room before turning toward the defendant's table. Mr. Carter, she said evenly, you may now address the court regarding the remaining charge. Please be aware this is a matter of criminal resistance, and the court expects clarity. Logan stood slowly. His movement was deliberate, composed, not the kind of man who flinches. He stepped forward, facing the jury box. He didn't hold any documents this time. No photos, no exhibits, just his voice. I'd like to tell you what happened that night. He began not in legal terms, but in human ones. No one moved, not even Keegan. I left my friend Alex's apartment at around 11:40 p.m. I was returning the keys to the truck he'd borrowed from his grandfather, parked in the Edgewater lot just like we'd agreed. He paused. It was late, dark, windy. You've seen the footage. He looked toward Judge Reeves and she didn't interrupt. I had just placed the keys in the glove box and was stepping away when I saw movement behind me. Fast. Low to the ground. Someone sprinting toward me. A murmur moved through the gallery like a breath. No sirens, no flashing lights, no police freeze. Just a man in dark clothes coming fast. He raised his hand slowly. Let me explain something about how the mind works when you've lived through combat. Reeves's expression changed subtly, not softening, but listening harder. Logan continued, voice calm but pulsing with something deeper. When you've served in hostile zones, the body remembers. It doesn't ask for permission. It reacts. There are rules you follow when something moves fast in the dark. He met the jury's eyes one by one. You move. You survive. You don't freeze and hope. You run. He took a quiet breath. I didn't run from justice. I didn't run because I was guilty. I ran because everything in my nervous system, everything trained into me during war zones in Fallujah and Kandahar said, danger. Unknown threat. React now. Ask later. A heavy silence. Keegan shifted but said nothing. Logan's tone softened. Was it the perfect decision? No, but it was honest, instinctual, human. He turned to the judge now. Your Honor, I didn't resist arrest. I reacted to what I perceived as a threat. I didn't throw punches. I didn't pull a weapon. I fled. When I was tackled, I stopped struggling the moment I heard, "You're under arrest." That's not obstruction. That's confusion. Panic. Survival. He let his words settle in the wood and air of the courtroom. Then I was running away from the unknown, not from the law. Judge Reeves looked at him for a long moment. No gavel. No words. Just silence. The kind that hangs in courtrooms when truth has no need for punctuation. She finally turned to Keegan. Do you wish to cross-examine? The prosecutor stood, hesitated, then walked forward. He paced, once, then stopped. You're a veteran, Mr. Carter, I am. Marine Logan nodded once. Yes. Decorated? Logan looked straight at him. That's not relevant here. Keegan turned to the jury. But it is, because a decorated Marine knows about control, discipline, de-escalation. He pivoted back. So why didn't you de-escalate? Why didn't you stop and raise your hands? Logan's response was immediate but not sharp. Because Mr. Keegan, the brain doesn't hold board meetings under threat. It acts. You've studied law. I've studied survival, the jury murmured. Keegan's lips tightened. So what you're saying is, you're not responsible for your actions. I'm saying I'm responsible enough to explain them, which is more than this court's been offered until now. Even Judge Reeves's brows lifted slightly at that. Keegan paused. He saw the tide turning again, and this time there was no rope to hold on to. No further questions, he said, and returned to his seat. Judge Reeves cleared her throat. Her voice was clear, but lower than before, as if measured with care. The jury will take into account the defendant's sworn statement, his reasoning for perceived flight, and any applicable interpretations of California Penal Code, Section 148, which governs resisting arrest. She tapped her pen once against her pad, then looked at Logan. For a long time. You may be seated, Mr. Carter. Logan bowed his head once and returned to the defendant's table. He didn't look around the courtroom, but he didn't need to. He could feel it. For the first time since the trial began, the room was not against him. And the judge, the same woman who once smirked at his opening defense, now regarded him not with derision, not even curiosity, but respect. A quiet, reluctant respect, tinged with something more, something human, something that might, if the wind shifted just right, become the seed of something deeper. There was tension in the air, not the hostile kind, but the kind that came before a curtain rose. Even the jury could feel it. Over 7 chapters of testimony, the quiet, humble veteran sitting alone at the defense table had defied every expectation. He had dismantled the prosecution's narrative not with theatrics, but with razor-sharp logic, emotional restraint, and something even more rare in a courtroom human decency. But Mark Keegan wasn't ready to lose. Not yet. As the courtroom settled, Keegan stood from his table with the stiffness of a man who had spent the night rehearsing. Your Honor, he said, if I may, I'd like to recall the court's attention to the most fundamental point here. Judge Reeves looked up from her notepad. You may proceed. Keegan turned to face the jury, but his words were aimed like arrows at Logan Carter. We've heard eloquence. We've seen charts and photographs. We've been touched by talk of military instincts and memory lapses. But let's not be so moved that we forget the core truth. This man is not a lawyer. He turned, locking eyes with Logan. Mr. Carter, are you a licensed attorney? Logan didn't flinch. No. Do you hold an active bar certification in the state of California? Number Keegan smiled just slightly. Have you ever practiced law in any civilian court? Logan remained still. No. A murmur spread across the gallery again. Keegan spread his arms, as if drawing a net around the jury. You see, that's the point. You're watching a man who has no formal legal training cross-examine officers of the law, submit evidence, and interpret penal code, all without a license. He turned to the bench. With due respect, Your Honor, this borders on mockery. Courts exist to preserve justice, not to let rogue individuals weaponize their personal experiences to manipulate a courtroom. Logan stood slowly. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't object. He simply spoke. Permission to respond. Your Honor. Judge Reeves stared at him for a long moment, then nodded. You may. Logan walked forward. No notes, no papers, just his voice. Mr. Keegan is absolutely right, he said, plainly. I'm not a lawyer. He let the words settle, even nodding slightly toward the jury, as if to say, you deserve that truth. I haven't practiced law in any civilian court. I don't have a license in California. I didn't go to an Ivy League school, and I don't have a polished resume. He paused, and his voice grew quieter. But there's something Mr. Keegan didn't ask me. He turned, locking eyes with the prosecutor. You didn't ask me what I was. Keegan shifted. Logan took one more step toward the center of the courtroom. I was a JAG officer, a Judge Advocate General, United States Marine Corps. I served 12 years in military law. The room gasped, audible. Even Keegan's jaw slackened just slightly. Logan continued, still calm, still grounded. I led over 300 courts-martial, including capital cases. I've prosecuted war crimes, defended Marines under fire, interpreted the UCMJ with a satellite phone, while helicopters circled a sand-blown outpost in Helmand. His voice dropped lower. I left that behind when my wife died. I walked away from the courtroom, from the rank, from the credentials. Not because I was unqualified, but because I had a daughter, and she had just lost her mother. A hush fell over the room. Logan turned now not to Keegan but to the jury. I'm not standing here today pretending to be something I'm not. I'm standing here using everything I once was, because that's the only thing I have left to protect what matters. Judge Reeves hadn't moved. Her fingers were still wrapped around her pen, but she hadn't written a word in minutes. Her eyes, always composed, often skeptical, now searched Logan with something else entirely. Recognition. Not just respect. Not just admiration. But understanding. The kind born of shared burden, of lives lived behind courtrooms that demand more from the soul than the law ever writes down. She cleared her throat. Mr. Keegan, she said, her voice unexpectedly gentle. Do you wish to respond? Keegan hesitated. He looked at Logan, then at the jury, and finally back to the judge. No, he said quietly. The state rests. Logan returned to his seat. There was no smile on his face, no trace of arrogance, just a quiet kind of ache, the kind that comes when a man opens a locked door inside himself and shows the world what's been hidden. The courtroom didn't know what to do with that kind of truth, but they felt it. So did the jury, and so perhaps most deeply did Judge Isabella Reeves. The courtroom had fallen silent, not the polite silence of procedure, but the stunned, reverent kind that follows a truth no one expected to hear. He was a JAG officer. Those 5 words had shifted the entire axis of the trial. The man everyone had mocked for representing himself. The man dismissed by the judge, laughed at by the audience, underestimated by the prosecution, had once been a military attorney who had stared down war crimes, tribunals, and high-stakes justice under gunfire. And he had walked away from it all. But why that was the question Judge Isabella Reeves couldn't shake as she sat behind her bench, trying to ignore the quiet pulse pounding in her ears. She glanced at Logan, still calm, still composed, but different now. Unmasked. Mr. Carter, she said, her voice unusually soft. You mentioned you left your legal career behind because of personal loss. Logan stood. The courtroom watched him rise, as if he were climbing from some invisible trench. Yes, Your Honor. Would you care to clarify for the record? He paused. The pause went on long enough that even Keegan looked up. Then Logan nodded. Slowly, he reached into his worn green jacket, the same jacket that had been dismissed by so many in the room, and pulled out a small, faded leather wallet. From it, he slid out a scuffed, laminated ID card. The colors had long faded, the corners curled, but the words were still legible. Logan Carter, United States Marine Corps, Judge Advocate General Corps. He walked to the bailiff and handed it over. Exhibit H, he said quietly. The bailiff brought it to the bench. Judge Reeves held the card in both hands, not like a piece of evidence, but like a relic. It was real. Official. Worn by time and grief. The silence grew heavier as she looked back at Logan. You held this rank. For how long? 12 years. And then he drew a slow breath. I resigned after my wife passed away. He paused again. I was deployed overseas when she was diagnosed with late-stage lymphoma. I rushed back in time for her final 2 weeks. Our daughter was only 3. He looked down at his hands. I missed birthdays. First steps. Nights she cried, and her mother couldn't hold her. When my wife died, my little girl looked at me and said, "Are you coming home now, Daddy?" He raised his eyes steady. I never left again. A few quiet gasps rippled through the courtroom. A woman in the gallery wiped her eyes. Even one of the younger jurors, a man with slicked back hair and a sharp suit, leaned forward and stopped taking notes. Logan continued, his voice unwavering. I declined reinstatement, turned down Pentagon offers. I left law, took a civilian job fixing HVAC units. We moved to a quiet suburb. I didn't want her to grow up with half a father. I wanted to be there for every scraped knee, every science fair, every bedtime story. He paused again. I didn't stop being a lawyer because I failed. I stopped because I succeeded at something more important. A full silence. This wasn't cross-examination. This was confession. And no one in the room, not even Keegan, dared interrupt. Judge Reeves blinked hard once, then folded her hands tightly on the bench. Thank you, Mr. Carter. He gave a quiet nod and returned to his seat. The judge looked down at the faded JAG card still resting beside her gavel. She'd once mocked this man for daring to speak in her courtroom. She now realized he'd probably argued before more tribunals than she ever had. But that wasn't what moved her. It was the why. She had met brilliant lawyers. She had met decorated veterans. But she had never met one who gave up all of it for bedtime stories. Keegan rose stiffly, but didn't approach the witness stand. He simply spoke almost reluctantly. No questions from the state, Your Honor. Reeves looked surprised, but not as surprised as the jury. Logan didn't look at the prosecutor. He didn't gloat. He just folded his hands as if the worst part of the trial wasn't the accusations, but having to speak the truth he'd kept buried for years. When the court recessed for lunch, Judge Reeves remained at the bench. The gallery slowly emptied, but she sat there alone, turning the JAG card over in her hand. On the back, scribbled faintly in faded ink, was a child's handwriting. Daddy's badge. For Ellie, her eyes lingered on that line longer than she expected. Then she glanced up at the empty defense table. Her gaze softened. He didn't lose his license. He chose love over legacy. And something inside her, the steel armor she wore every day on the bench, cracked just slightly. When the court resumed after lunch, there was something different in the room. It wasn't just the packed gallery, now full to standing room only, or the jurors who had returned with sharpened focus and straightened posture. It wasn't even the subdued tone in Ada Mark Keegan's voice as he organized his closing materials. It was him. Logan Carter. The man no one had expected. The man who had entered the courtroom 3 days earlier in a worn military jacket and stood alone, now sat like a storm, waiting to be called upon again. Judge Reeves, too, had changed. Her gavel hand rested lightly on the bench, but she hadn't touched it since recess. Instead, her eyes lingered on the defense table, where Logan sat with folded hands and an expression unreadable even to the most seasoned trial judge. She tapped her pen once, then looked at Keegan. "Mr. Keegan, any remaining witnesses?" The prosecutor stood. "No further witnesses, Your Honor." "Very well." She turned to Logan. "Mr. Carter." "Yes, Your Honor. I'd like to call one final rebuttal witness." Keegan rolled his eyes. "And who might that be?" Logan stood, buttoned his collar, and said calmly, "Assistant District Attorney, Mark Keegan." The room inhaled as one. Keegan blinked. "Excuse me." Logan stepped forward. "You've testified indirectly throughout this trial through your arguments, your presentations, your interpretation of the evidence. I'd like the jury to hear your positions stated clearly under oath." "Objection," Keegan snapped. "This is absurd." Judge Reeves raised her hand. "Actually," she said. Slowly, eyes locked on Keegan, California Evidence Code. Section 776 permits a party to call an adverse witness, including counsel, if their statements and conduct have been central to disputed facts. She leaned back. "I'll allow it." Keegan stiffened. The gavel didn't fall. Only Logan's voice did. A few minutes later, Keegan sat in the witness chair, visibly bristling, but composed. The court clerk swore him in, and Logan stood before him, sleeves rolled just slightly at the cuffs, not out of informality but readiness. "Mr. Keegan," he began, "would you agree that, in your opening statement, you declared this case to be clear as day?" "I did." "And that you implied I was caught red-handed in an attempted vehicle theft?" "Yes." Logan nodded. "And yet under your own witness's testimony, Officer Daniels, you failed to confirm visual contact through tinted windows, misidentified my jacket color, and testified to details that have since been contradicted." Keegan hesitated. "His testimony stands." Logan paced, once, then turned. "But your interpretation of it is what I'm addressing. Are you now saying you maintain full confidence in the factual accuracy of Officer Daniels's entire statement?" Keegan straightened. "Yes, as a representative of law enforcement." "Thank you," Logan cut in. He turned to the screen where a transcript of Daniels's testimony was projected. Line 48, Officer Daniels states, "He was crouched messing with wires clearly visible." And line 63, "He had a flashlight that allowed me to see inside." Logan turned back. Yet the surveillance footage shows the truck windows were fully closed, tinted, and Officer Daniels was over 20 feet away. He approached the jury box. "So I ask you, Mr. Keegan, which is it? Did he see through a tinted window in the dark from 20 feet? Or was that a conclusion you as prosecutor wanted the jury to accept as fact?" Keegan's face twitched. "I was presenting the facts available, or the version of facts that fit your narrative," Keegan said, then blinked, realizing he was the witness. The courtroom chuckled lightly. Even Judge Reeves allowed the faintest smile to tug at the corner of her lips. Logan didn't smile. He continued. "Let's move to the dashcam footage." He tapped a clicker. On screen appeared a frozen frame of the shadowy figure, the evidence Keegan had once deemed incontrovertible. "You stated this footage confirmed my presence at the scene. I said it matched your profile. Yet you failed to note the suspect in the footage was left-handed. I'm documented, photographed, and fingerprinted as right-handed." Keegan opened his mouth. No words came out. Logan pressed. "You also claimed I resisted arrest. But Officer Daniels testified he tackled me before identifying himself, and that I ceased all resistance immediately upon hearing I was under arrest." "Yes, but you fled, I fled a man in dark clothes charging me in a dim parking lot. He paused. Wouldn't you? No answer. Logan turned to the jury. What's on trial here isn't my memory or my past. It's the truth. Truth that got lost in the assumption that a man wearing an old green jacket couldn't possibly defend himself. Then he looked back at Keegan. You assumed I didn't belong in this courtroom? That I wouldn't know the rules, the strategy, the burden of proof. But the truth is, Logan walked toward the bench, not too close, but near enough to let his words carry. I was building case law while you were still in law school. Judge Reeves stared at him, not as a defendant, not even as a former JAG, but as an equal. Then slowly, softly, she nodded once. Logan turned back to Keegan. No further questions. Keegan, red-faced, was dismissed. He walked back to his table like a man who had just been outplayed at his own game because he had. As Logan returned to his seat, a low murmur of admiration spread across the courtroom. In the gallery, someone whispered, "He just out-lawyered the lawyer." And from the jury box, one elderly man scribbled a note and underlined it twice. Judge Reeves called a short recess. As she rose from the bench, her eyes met Logan's. And this time, she didn't look away. There was nothing left to question, nothing left to mock. There was only respect, and perhaps something more. The jury had been out for 3 hours. 3 long, measured hours filled with low murmurs in the gallery, the occasional shuffle of papers, and the kind of breathless silence only found in courtrooms during the final stretch of something that no longer felt like a case, but a reckoning. Logan Carter sat alone. He hadn't moved from his seat since the jury left. His jacket was folded neatly over the back of the chair. His hands were still fingers, laced elbows on the table, like a man waiting not for judgment, but for peace. Judge Isabella Reeves watched him from the bench. She didn't hide it anymore, the way her eyes lingered just a moment longer, the way her posture softened ever so slightly when he looked her way. Something about Logan had gotten past the robes, past the bench, past the defenses she'd built in years of wielding a gavel like armor. He had gotten through with quiet, devastating honesty. A rustle from the bailiff broke the stillness. "Your Honor," the man said. Stepping forward, "The jury has reached a verdict." Every eye in the courtroom turned to the 12 men and women entering solemnly from the deliberation room. They filed into the box with the precision of ceremony, not performance. Logan didn't look at them. He looked down. Then just for a moment, he reached into his jacket pocket and placed something on the table. A small folded photo. From where Judge Reeves sat, she couldn't see the image, but she recognized the posture, the way a man anchors himself to something sacred when everything else is uncertain. Family. Her chest tightened. The clerk stood. "Will the foreperson please rise?" A middle-aged woman in a navy blazer stood, voice clear and composed. In the matter of the state of California versus Logan Carter, she took a breath. On count 2, resisting arrest. "We, the jury, find the defendant." Pause. "Not guilty." No explosion. No cheers. Just silence. And then the sound of a collective exhale, as if the entire courtroom had been holding its breath and now released it together. Logan closed his eyes, only for a second, then opened them, lifted the photo and tucked it carefully back into his pocket. Judge Reeves straightened. Her voice was even, but there was a slight tremor that only the trained would notice. "Mr. Carter, you are hereby cleared of all charges. You are free to go." She looked like she was going to say more, then stopped herself. But after a moment, she stood, something judges rarely do at the closing of a case. "Before we adjourn," she said, turning to the courtroom, "I'd like to speak as more than a judge." Murmurs stopped. She looked directly at Logan. "When this trial began, I saw a man standing alone without credentials, without counsel, without pretense. I saw what I thought was a foolish choice, made by a proud man too stubborn to accept help. Her voice steadied. I now realize I wasn't looking at a man who lacked representation. I was looking at a man who had once been the very embodiment of it, and who gave it all up, not out of failure, but out of love. The room was silent. She stepped down from the bench, another rarity, and walked slowly to the floor, stopping just a few feet from Logan's table. Mr. Carter, today you reminded this courtroom that justice is not about titles or degrees. It's about truth, about character. She reached into her robe and pulled out his old JAG ID, still in its plastic evidence sleeve. She placed it gently on the table in front of him. "This belongs to you," she said softly. Logan looked up, eyes meeting hers. For the first time since the trial began, she was the one who blinked. A heartbeat passed. Then he said, "I think it belongs to the past." But he took it, not as a claim, but as a memory. As the gavel fell one final time, the courtroom stood. Logan remained seated for a moment longer, waiting for the crowd to thin, for the chatter to fade. When he finally rose, Judge Reeves was still standing near the bench, pretending to organize papers she wasn't looking at. He walked toward the exit, then paused. Turned. "You were fair," he said quietly enough that only she could hear. Her eyes met his. "You were honest," she replied. Another silence, this one not awkward, but unwritten. "Take care of her," she added. Logan nodded once, every day. And then he walked out. The courtroom doors opened wide as he stepped into the late afternoon sunlight. And for the first time in a long while, Logan Carter wasn't walking away from something. He was walking toward something. The courthouse cafeteria was quiet, a rarity. The lunch crowd had come and gone. Most staff had clocked out. The echoes of trays and utensils had faded into soft jazz, playing from a corner speaker, slightly tinny, but oddly comforting. Logan Carter sat at a back table by the window, a cup of black coffee in front of him untouched. He wasn't there for caffeine. He was thinking. Or maybe just breathing. For the first time in weeks, the tightness behind his ribs had loosened. The burden, legal, emotional, spiritual, had been lifted. The courtroom was behind him, the fight done. But not everything felt finished. "Do you mind if I join you?" The voice came soft, elegant, with the same measured cadence he'd heard from the bench for days. Logan looked up. There she was, Judge Isabella Reeves, but not in robes. She stood in a simple navy blouse and black trousers, her hair let down the faintest touch of lip color. Still dignified, still poised, but no longer hidden behind the authority of the bench. For a moment, Logan said nothing. Then he gestured to the empty chair across from him. She sat. Not as a judge, as a woman. They sat for a beat, no words exchanged, letting the silence speak first. Then she folded her hands on the table. "I don't usually do this," she said. "Meeting defendants." Logan tilted his head slightly. "I suppose I'm not exactly usual." She smiled, the first genuine smile he'd seen from her that wasn't veiled in procedure. "No," she said. "You're not." Another pause. Then she added softly, "I underestimated you. From the moment you walked into that courtroom." Logan looked down at his hands, then up again. "You weren't alone." "I was worse," she said, surprising him. "I was dismissive. I saw a man in a faded jacket and thought he couldn't possibly navigate a courtroom." She tapped her finger gently on the table. "But you didn't just navigate it. You owned it." Logan gave a faint shrug. It wasn't about winning. No, she agreed. It was about something bigger. They fell quiet again, this time. Not awkward, but oddly comforting, like two old soldiers who had survived the same war from different trenches. After a moment, she leaned forward slightly. "That photo. The one you kept folded in your jacket. He nodded. Was it your daughter? Logan reached into his pocket. Slowly, carefully. He pulled out the photo and slid it across the table. It was worn edges, soft, but still clear. A little girl, maybe 6, smiling wide with missing front teeth, arms around a golden retriever son in her hair. Isabella smiled softly as she picked it up. She's beautiful. She's everything, Logan said simply. She looked at the photo a moment longer, then returned it. You never mentioned her name. Ellie. A quiet beat. Does she know what you just did for her? Logan hesitated, then said, Not yet. But someday, I want her to understand what truth costs, and why it's always worth it. Isabella nodded slowly. Her eyes lingered on him now, not just admiring his composure or clarity, but something deeper, something personal. You gave up an entire career for her, she whispered. I gave up a world, he said. But I got mine back. She sat back. You know, in law school they taught us about justice, like it was a formula. Precedent, statute, procedure. She exhaled. But you reminded me it's also about people. Flesh and blood. Pain and sacrifice. He tilted his head slightly. You were fair. Even when you didn't believe in me yet. You gave me space to speak. She smiled, small and real. That wasn't generosity, Mr. Carter. That was you earning it. A pause. Then, and, you can call me Isabella. He nodded. Logan. They smiled at the same time. The coffee had gone cold between them. Neither cared. Isabella glanced out the window where a slow orange dusk was settling. I have a dinner reservation tonight. Some law firm donor event, she said, then looked back at him. But suddenly, it feels less important. Logan chuckled. Judges can skip donor dinners. Rarely. But I'm known for bending protocol. Now, anyway. He looked at her. Really looked at her. There were no more robes, no more walls. Just a woman who had built a life out of rules, now sitting across from a man who had once walked away from all of them for love. Their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them. Not romance yet, not flirtation. Something better, a cognition. Two people who had lived hard truths and had the courage to live softer ones now. Isabella reached for her purse, then paused. If I ever needed representation, she said with a faint smirk, I know exactly who I'd want. Logan smiled. Let me guess. Someone with no license, no office, and a very opinionated daughter. She stood, leaving the joke in the air like a feather. No, she said, turning toward the door. Someone who remembers why truth matters. Then, before she walked away, she turned back. And Logan? He looked up. You ever want to talk again off the record, I'd like that. He nodded once. I'd like that too. She left. The door closed softly behind her. Logan sat alone again, but this time he didn't feel alone at all. The courthouse steps gleamed beneath the mid-afternoon sun, each granite tier absorbing the quiet rhythm of departure. The trial was over. Most of the gallery had already dispersed reporters, with their microphones onlookers, whispering about that veteran guy, staffers and clerks checking watches and shifting back to routine. But Logan Carter lingered. He stood alone near the bottom of the steps, hands in his jacket pockets, gazing out at the street. For the first time in what felt like years, he had no plan, no strategy, no closing argument to write in his head. He simply stood there, free. A breeze rustled through the leaves of the trees lining the sidewalk, and just as he inhaled that breath of peace, a voice rang out. Daddy. He turned, and there she was, barreling toward him in a blur of tangled hair, pink sneakers, and unmatched socks. Ellie, his daughter, 7 years old now, all elbows and knees, and endless questions. Her backpack bounced as she ran, arms, wide eyes shining. Logan dropped to one knee just in time to catch her in a full-speed hug. "Easy, kiddo," he laughed into her shoulder, his voice cracking in the way that comes when strength finally lets go. "I missed you," she said into his collar. "Grandma said you had to go be a grown-up for a few days." "Was it scary?" He held her tighter. "A little," he admitted. "Did you win?" He pulled back to look at her, brushing a loose strand of hair from her face. "I think I did," he said. "But not the way you think." She squinted. "Did they give you a trophy?" He smiled. "Better." She looked down, confused. "Better than a trophy." Logan nodded and placed his palm gently over her heart. "They gave me the chance to come home to you." Ellie paused, then wrapped her arms around his neck again, with all the force her little body could summon. From across the street, someone watched quietly. Judge Isabella Reeves stood beside a lamppost, half shielded by a flowering tree, her arms folded gently, her robe long since replaced by a soft blazer and slacks. She had exited the courthouse through the side stairwell, avoiding attention not out of fear, but out of reverence. She hadn't meant to stop, but she had, because something pulled her back, not guilt, not curiosity, something more tender, wonder. She watched the reunion between father and daughter with a warmth she hadn't let herself feel in years. In court, she had been the gatekeeper of justice, but here, in this moment, she was just a woman watching a man become whole again. As Ellie tugged her father toward a bench beneath the trees, Logan glanced across the street, instinct perhaps, and their eyes met. Just for a second. No words, no nods, but something passed between them, something that required no gavel to certify, a flicker of possibility. Minutes later, Logan and Ellie sat side by side on the bench, sharing a sandwich she had packed in a slightly smushed lunchbox. Peanut butter, too much jelly crust, half bitten by accident earlier that day. "So what are we going to do now?" she asked, mouthful. He thought for a moment. "Well, first we go home. Feed Moose." She grinned. "Moose hates peanut butter. He's a complicated dog." She giggled. And after that, Logan looked up at the sky, wide, bright, unforgivingly honest. "After that," he said, "I think we just live. Like go to the park, exactly. Like eat spaghetti and not do homework." He chuckled. "Maybe not that kind of living." Ellie leaned against him, and for the first time in a long while, Logan let himself lean back. Not to hide, but to rest. Back across the street, Isabella Reeves lingered a moment longer. Then she turned away. But not before she smiled. Not the smirk of a judge behind a bench, but the small, private smile of a woman who had witnessed something rare. A man who had walked through fire and came out softer, not harder. Later that night at home, Logan placed the old JAG ID card on the shelf beside a framed photo of his wife. He didn't say anything. He didn't have to. The badge belonged to the past, but the strength behind it that still lived in him. And now, for the first time in years, he didn't need a courtroom to prove it. He had Ellie, and he had the truth. And sometimes, that was more than enough. We'd love to hear from you. Where are you watching from? Let us know in the comments below. Your stories and perspectives mean more than you know. If this story touched your heart, please consider subscribing to the channel. It helps us continue sharing moments that matter, stories of kindness, quiet courage, and second chances. Thank you for spending your time with us. Until next time, stay well, stay kind, and keep believing in the power of good people.